All right, everybody, I want to welcome you to a very special presentation with a good buddy of mine who's a top secret agent, of course. This is sort of a follow up to our um, Deal Maker boot camp that we just did 10 days ago. There was a really special session that Quincy was going to deliver for us, but he couldn't do it because we just didn't have quite enough time. But it's a super important section. So he agreed to do like a Deal Maker reunion boot camp, and I'm glad to see so many of you guys jumping in, still signing in. So I've seen a lot of people doing deals since the boot camp, which is really awesome to see. Immediately, I know that Rose Ramos went out and put a house on a contract the next day. I talked to somebody else who got a Section 8 house. And so many of you guys have been out there doing deals in the last 10 days. And so many of you have also opened up self directed IRAs with Quest, which is even better because it is an important investment vehicle for your future. But that is certainly good news. Now, if you guys can see the screen okay, and if you can hear me okay, type into your chat box and just let me know. So make sure that we got the platform working. And in just a second here, I'm going to turn this over to Quincy. But let me go ahead and introduce him. This is a picture from our boot camp. There's Barb and Kevin right in the front row, of course. And here's Quincy Skyfall Long, of course, who's our top secret financial agent. He's going to share a lot of secrets. And there he is. So this is the section we're going to cover, which is Coverdell, educational savings, and HSA health savings as well. Thank you, Steve Wise. It's good to see you on here. Thanks for the note. Barb Thomas, Derek, Art, Edward, Mark, Natalie, how are you? It's good to see all you guys jumping in. At this point, Quincy, I'm going to go ahead and change presenters over to you, okay? And you will see a pop-up. This is being recorded, by the way. So we can do that. Do you have the box there, Quincy?
I do.
Awesome. You're looking good. I see you right through your webcam. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. How do I look naked?
That'll make everybody laugh. Wait till I tell Marcia about this.
Yeah. Okay. So you tell me when you want to get started.
Go ahead, jump right in. Quincy Long from Quest IRA, the world's best self-directed IRA. I always say self-directed IRAs are the world's best kept secret, and even more better kept secret than them is growing your HSA and ESAs. I mean, imagine the possibilities, right, Quincy?
That's exactly what I always say. That Jim, that's right. And what I like most about these two accounts, especially the HSA, as we'll get into in a moment, is they're not even on anybody's radar. As far as we hear a lot about the Roth IRAs in particular being attacked as something that people are abusing, which probably is true, but not here at Quest, of course, never here.
Of course.
So, but Coverdells and HSAs are not even on the list. They're not even on the radar. So I kind of like them for that reason. Plus, as we'll get into, I really, really like HSAs. So let's go ahead and get started on it. And we'll go with that. This is way, yeah, exactly the way you feel when you go to the doctor, or in my case, take your daughter to the doctor and have surgery on her knee. Like a giant sucking sound out of your bank account. So anyway, the fact is that the healthcare costs are going way up. I think we can all agree on that. It could be due to certain people, but we won't get political or anything like that here. So what we like to say about the health savings account, which is the first part we're covering, is that it gives you the best of both worlds. And what do we mean by that? It means simply this: an HSA or health savings account is the only one that you get to deduct the money putting into the account and that's no matter what your income level is, and yet it comes out tax-free. So it's tax-free going in, it's tax-free coming out for qualified medical expenses. So it just doesn't get any better than that. It's even better than a Roth in that sense. And so we love the HSA here at Quest. Okay, and I kind of gave it away, didn't I? That contributions to an HSA are tax deductible, and if used for qualified medical expenses, distributions are tax-free forever. One of my favorite phrases, by the way, is tax-free forever. So everybody probably wants an HSA, because who wouldn't want to pay for their health care with pre-tax dollars instead of after-tax dollars?
Well,
But
I
you do
like
have
tax
to have
free
a
forever. Can I buy some tax free forever? That's a great idea.
I think so. But you do have to have, the downside is you do have to have a high deductible health plan or an HDHP to contribute to an HSA. And that's not as egregious as it sounds. The deductible for an individual can be as low as $1,250, and for a family it's $2,500. Those figures are adjusted every year, so check with whatever the current year is. And that's the minimum deductible, and then there's a maximum out-of-pocket cost, which we'll get to in a minute. But you have to have a high deductible health plan, and that just, by the way, just because you have a high deductible on your health plan does not make it a high deductible health plan, which is a term of art, meaning the plan has certain features. And you can always find out if your plan is HSA compliant simply by checking with your healthcare provider. They will know the answer to that question. It's something they get asked a lot. Also, I wanted to always say that don't assume just because you're getting health insurance through your employer that it's not a high deductible health plan, because many employers offer HDHP as alternatives to their employees because frankly it's a cheaper program for the employer. So you can get HDHPs at your employment as well as privately, which is what I do right now until I'm forced to do it through the company. Anyway, another requirement is the high deductible health plan, or HDHP, must be the only form of health coverage, with some limited exceptions such as long-term care and whatnot. But basically, that has to be your coverage, is the high deductible health plan for you to be qualified. You must not be enrolled in Medicare. Of course, typically people enroll in Medicare at age 65 because it's a great benefit. But you cannot be enrolled in Medicare and have contribute rather to a high deductible health plan. And also you cannot be claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return. So that knocks out high schoolers and college students as well, typically, that are dependents on their parents' tax return. But that's the requirements to have an HSA. So what are oh yes, I always like to point this story out because though this is now years old, the HSA became viable for me and my family in 2007. So that's when I got the HSA. And at the time, I had a health plan with a $2,000 deductible, and my monthly health insurance premium was $754, as egregious as that sounds. I went from there to a high deductible. I'm not sure the deductible is spelled right on that, is it? But anyway, high deductible health plan, and it went from a $2,000 deductible to a $2,200 deductible, and my premium dropped down to $450 a month.
So the high deductible was only 10% higher?
Well, it was, and as I was about to say, that's a little misleading in the sense that the other health plans started covering prescriptions at a much lower number, but still, the overall deductible only went up $200. That's what it was in 2007. So for me, it was an incredible boon to my abilities to do it. So what did that mean to me? At 2007, I was in a pretty high tax bracket at 35%, and I calculated that the deduction of the money that I put in, which was $5,650, that was that year's contribution limit, was saved me $1,977 in taxes. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Good
And
enough.
on top of that, I also saved an additional over the next 12 months $3,648 off of my health insurance premiums. And these are actual numbers.
That
So
is
that
really
meant,
unbelievable when you look at it.
yeah, that meant my total savings for the 12 months following when I started this program was $5,625. And what did I put into the account? $5,650.
Hmm.
So I'd say that's pretty good, don't you think, Jim?
Looks awesome. Everybody better be taking notes.
So, what are the limits for the current year? Well, if you're single coverage, that's just you and nobody else, you can put up to $3,300 for 2014 into an HSA if you qualify as we described. For a family of four, a family plan, which is you and another family member, it's $6,550, or not quite double for a family plan. If you're age 55 or older, and that's not a typo, a lot of the retirement accounts you get the catch up at age 50, but not in HSAs. Age 55 or older, by the end of the year, you can add another $1,000 to those figures of what you can put in your HSA. And if you already have a high deductible health plan in place by December 1st, you can actually make a full contribution for the year, even though you've only been covered for 1 month of the year. The caveat there is you have to continue to be covered for the next year in order to not make that an excess contribution. But what that meant for me is in 2007, the plan got in place in sometime mid-November, so I made a $5,650 contribution in December, and then turned right around in January and made another 5,700 or whatever the limit was for 2008 into the plan, and I already had over $11,000 to work with in investing. I looked, and my current plan is grown to a value of roughly $65,000 or $70,000. That's
Holy
excluding
smokes.
any equity. So I really, of all the accounts that I have, the HSA is the very first one I fund, followed closely by the traditional IRA, which I convert immediately to a Roth because it's so beneficial.
That is awesome.
Okay, let's see. So another question I get sometimes is, what if I'm worried about my deductible being too high? Well, the answer to that is you don't have to have a deductible which equals your contribution. What used to happen before 2007 is you could only put into the HSA what was your deductible. So if you chose a deductible as an individual of $1,250, then that's all you could put in. And so in 2007, they changed that rule to say, well, you could have the lowest of the possible deductibles and still put the full contribution in. So that's what enabled me to decide that the HSA was beneficial to me, because my wife and my daughter, who had asthma at the time, took a lot of prescriptions. And for me to have a deductible of $5,600 just didn't work for me until they changed the rule and said, well, you can have a lower family deductible, the lowest one possible. Again, this year that deductible would be $2,500 or $2,600 or whatever it is, and yet I could still put the full amount of $6,550 in. That was a wonderful deal for me, and it made the HSA viable for me as an account. So that was pretty good. So what are the minimums? This is $1,250, as I have already mentioned. The minimum annual deductible of $1,250 and $2,500 for a family, and the maximum out of pocket is $6,350, and $12,700 for a family, which I'm sorry to report I've already met for the year with my daughter's knee surgery. Yeah, well, it
Yeah.
happens, right? And they're always so grateful that you put them through the torture. You know what I mean, Jim? Well, we won't go into that, will we?
At least you're
Um,
prepared, and you did it without having to pay tax on it.
yeah, that's true. So anyway, the way these things works is you get basically no uh, benefit essentially other than the fact that you're covered by insurance and the insurance companies negotiate discounts in advance. You get no coverage until you reach the deductible, whatever choice you have made, and then you get partial coverage, until you get to the maximum out of pocket, and after the maximum out of pocket, they're supposed to pay all of it. So that's the way the plan works. So what is a qualified medical expense? That's always the key question is what are we covering here? I mean, that's what we need to know. Well, it's pretty broad. It covers doctor's visits, hospitalization, which is cool, vision care. So it's not even just medical doctors. You can go to the eye doctor, and that's going to be covered as an expense. Dental care. This is not dental insurance. These are the things you can spend the money on. Hearing care. I know that's important to a lot of people. Psychiatric care, that's for people like you, Jim, that need a little help there. You can reimburse yourself for the psychiatrist through your HSA. Medications, as long as they're prescribed by a doctor, and a whole lot more. And I always refer people to IRS Publication 502, which are the list of medical expenses that are deductible on Schedule A of your tax return, and it's essentially the same list of what you can deduct as reimburse, I should say, out of your HSA account. So it's pretty broad. It's very nice. By the way, another thing that people don't know that I think is really, really important is that the medical expenses, if you have an HSA, don't just have to be incurred by you. They could be incurred by you, your spouse, your dependents that you claim on your tax return, and any person that you could have claimed as a dependent, but they had to file a certain, certain return because of some limits of gross income that were slightly more than the limit, as you can see there. So that is very helpful that you know that, for example, I have an HSA and I'm the only one on the account because it's my HSA, but I can reimburse expenses for my daughters and my wife and even my parents if they're, my dependents and whatnot. So that's very helpful. You do have to keep records, and that's key. You do not have to submit records to Quest IRA to request reimbursement of expenses, but you have to keep records sufficient to show that the distributions were exclusively to pay or reimburse qualified medical expenses, and those expenses had not been previously paid or reimbursed from another source. So in other words, you can't double dip. If your insurance company reimburses you for an expense, you don't get to count that. Or if you take the expenses on your Schedule A of your tax return, you don't get the double dip there. It's just this is one way to do it. And, well, that's what I just said, itemized expenses that have not been taken as a deduction in any year. So what are not qualified medical expenses? That's almost as important to know, and that is health insurance premiums are not expenses. Those are the way you get the policy. But you can have some limited exceptions for long-term care insurance, insurance while you're unemployed, COBRA coverage, and Medicare if you're over 65. There's some reimbursability there, but typically your insurance premiums, certainly for the high deductible health plan, are not going to be reimbursable from the HSA. Medicines that are not prescribed by a doctor are no longer able to be reimbursed by the HSA. It used to be so wild and crazy you could buy over-the-counter medication and reimburse yourself from your HSA. Not that I would recommend that you did that. Medical marijuana, however, and other controlled substances are not qualified medical expenses. I'm sorry about that, Jim, but
I
that's
mean,
just one of those
really,
things.
what are they
For
thinking?
the, I know, you would not think that they would be so controlling over that, but that's what it says specifically.
I wonder what the
And
Cooch
I love
doctors in Venice Beach think of that, right?
I know medical marijuana. I heard that they had a bill out the other day that they were going to make medical marijuana proposed to be legal in all states. So we'll see if that changes.
Hmm.
I love this. This next one, Jim's my favorite.
Yeah.
Unnecessary cosmetic surgery.
Hmm.
You know, I'm thinking that most of the people that have cosmetic surgery probably find it very necessary. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have
But
some friends I think that could use some cosmetic surgery, but they're probably not.
I know I could myself. Yeah. So
Exactly.
but unnecessary. So though that's really funny to hear, cosmetic surgery, for example, due to a medical condition such as rebuilding the breast after a mastectomy would be covered, but not just if you wanted bigger, well, breasts, is not going to be covered. So anyway, these are all covered in that IRS publication if you want to know the details. I always like to throw out some what I call HSA Fun Facts. And so one of them is that you can fund your HSA with a one-time transfer from a traditional or Roth IRA, not a SEP or a simple. And this is tax-free. So you
I mean,
might
that's a
ask,
great way to
well,
go,
why in
isn't
the
it?
world?
Because, I mean, that's a great
Well,
way to start your funding, isn't it?
well, let's discuss that for a minute
Okay.
because it's an interesting question. Why would you do that? Well, if you take a distribution, well, first of all, you'd never do it transferring it from a Roth IRA. That would be preposterous.
Mm-hmm.
But funding it from a traditional IRA, well, remember that distributions from a traditional IRA are typically taxed, whereas distributions from HSA are tax-free as long as they're qualified medical expenses. So you got a one-time shot. If you don't have any other source of funds, you can move it from your pre-tax uh, traditional IRA, from which taxes will be due if you draw it from the account, to the HSA, where you'll never have to pay taxes on it. And that sounds like a pretty good deal, but of course, you don't get the tax deduction if you do it that way. You're just moving money from the traditional to the HSA, and I prefer to get a tax deduction, so I'd rather fund it separately if I could. But this is an interesting little benefit that they've given you if you have no other way to do it. Also, this is probably one of the key points of HSAs. You can choose to have your HSA pay for qualified medical expenses from prior years as long as you incurred the expenses while the HSA was in place. So it won't surprise you to hear, Jim, that what I do is I save all my medical receipts and have been since 2007, and I have a folder and they're scanned in. And in that sense, anytime I want money tax-free, all I got to do is pull a few receipts out of the folder and mark them as reimbursed by the HSA and ask for a tax-free distribution. How many times, Jim, do you think I've done that in the last 7 years?
Wow, pretty interesting, isn't it?
How
How
many
many
how
times
many
have you
times
done it?
you how many times do you think, Jim, you know me, how many times do you think I would have done that?
As many as you can.
Zero, because of the
Taxes.
value of that account as it grows, because it's easier to make it grow the bigger it is,
Yeah,
right? Is so high, and I know I'm going to end up in an old folks' home someday, right?
I'm
That's my
sure.
tax-free pot of money. That's the last pot that I want to touch unless I have
Yeah.
to, because, well, I don't have the money for my daughter's surgery, which I do. So my point is, it's a very valuable account, but it's also very, very nice to know that I've got a safeguard, and that anytime I want cash, I can get it tax-free out of my HSA because I have these receipts that I've saved up over the last 7 years.
To
So it's kind of
reimburse
interesting.
yourself, sure.
Exactly. Also, here's something that's critically important. You, an HSA is not a use it or lose it proposition. You can keep the HSA as long as you have as long as you live, really, and pay for your qualified medical expenses even after you're no longer eligible to fund it. Remember, I said, for example, that at age 65 you can no longer fund the account, but that doesn't mean you're not still incurring qualified medical expenses, and you can always reimburse yourself for those expenses even afterwards. So this is a lifelong savings account, and it's just so wonderful. It's just hard to even describe it.
Yeah, and one of my favorite
This is,
parts of it, we haven't really talked about this, but you can fund your HSA or you can grow your HSA investing in real estate.
of course, we'll
We
get to
haven't
that.
talked about it, we've just assumed it, right?
Well, that's true. It's a pretty safe assumption that if the account is at Quest IRA Inc., you're likely to be able to do real estate in it.
But really,
And we'll
think of
give
it
you
now.
some.
You guys that are on the call with us that like to do wholesaling or do assignments, that's a quick way to grow your HSA super fast. Or maybe you wanted to take a property subject to and enjoy having a rental property pay for your health expenses.
Right,
Not a bad way to go, right,
exactly.
Quincy?
That's exactly right. Of course, with debt finance property, the HSA is subject to the same rules for unrelated business income tax as
Correct.
our IRAs, but that's another subject, which we should have a webinar on at some point, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, this is the only account. I find this to be a fascinating little fact that this is the only account that you can give somebody a tax deduction. So if you're a parent and your kid happens to be out of college and has a high deductible health plan, you can fund the account and or as an employer, you can fund the account and the deduction can still be taken. I'm sorry, any other person except for your employer. The employer, if they fund it, they get the deduction. But you can still deduct the contributions. The IRA, I mean the HSA owner can do it. So, for example, I think your daughter's out of college now. Is that correct, Jim, or not? I don't remember.
Yeah, she just graduated in May. Now she's got to do a year at the medical college and then she'll be officially done. But yeah, we're getting there.
You're getting there. Okay. So when she gets out and gets on her own, let's say that she has an HSA and she's still getting on her feet. Well, Dad can write the check for her HSA contribution and she can deduct it.
I mean, that's
So
pretty powerful
that's pretty
stuff.
weird. You can give somebody else a deduction. I think that's pretty cool. Maybe I'm just find these rules to be fun. Also, you may roll over amounts from your Archer MSA or medical savings account to your HSA is another thing that people don't know. Just some fun facts about
Now,
HSA.
Quincy, back to the HSA real quick. For people that are working with, corporate jobs and stuff that already have medical insurance, when does it make sense to have a separate HSA?
Well, remember, Jim, there has to be their only coverage. So if the
Right.
employer has a plan that's not an HSA compliant plan, it's possible that their spouse may be decline coverage under the employer's plan and get a separate HSA. But whoever's covered by the HSA, that has to be their primary coverage.
So this works best for people that are self-employed or retired.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you're certainly self-employed typically is going to have their own plan, but there's many circumstances where either, like I said earlier, an employer provides an HSA compliant high deductible health plan, or alternatively, the spouse just covers his or herself, and then the other spouse covers themselves and maybe even their children under a high deductible health plan. So there's many circumstances where one spouse will have coverage at work and still have an HSA, or their other spouse will have an HSA because of a private plan. So you just got to know what your choices are, and since we all have to have insurance these days or get attacked by the tax man, this discussion is even more relevant than it was before.
Right.
Okay, so another question I get is, what happens in my HSA if I die? Pretty good, important question. If your spouse is a beneficiary of the HSA, it just basically becomes your spouse's HSA automatically. Okay. If your spouse is not the beneficiary, in other words, it goes to the kids or the grandkids or my kids, then the account stops being an HSA and it's taxable to the beneficiary in the year in which you died. It's just taxable income to them, minus any medical expenses that are paid within a year after your death. So if you have final hospital bills and stuff like that, that can be reimbursed. But the tax benefit does not extend beyond you and your spouse. It becomes taxable when the kids or grandkids or my kids inherit your HSA account. So it's
Okay.
important to know that.
And setting those beneficiaries up is absolutely critical. Now, we have a question for you that came in. It says, for a married
Okay.
couple, do each
Yes,
do each of them get to open an HSA? And if so, what's the contribution limit for each of them?
it's a great question. And so, for example, if both of them are covered by HSAs, yes, they can each open an HSA. And in fact, if you read the federal publications, what they say is that spouses split those contribution limits, which I described to you earlier. They split them equally unless the spouse agrees otherwise, which is really a retarded thing because, as I've already explained, the qualified medical expenses are for you and your spouse. So why would you split the account into two different
Sure.
accounts? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. It's less convenient. It costs more money. It just doesn't make any sense except for in one circumstance, and that's where one spouse reaches age 55. So, for example, my wife is about 6 months older than I am. So, in the year she turns age 55, she will have her $1,000 in a separate HSA because I want to take the maximum benefit out of it. And then the next year I'll put an extra 1,000 in my HSA. So we'll have two HSAs at that point. But those limits that I described to you for family coverage, 6,550 for 2014, are split between the spouses basically in any way that they desire. Obviously, if it's single coverage, then whoever has the HSA or the high deductible health plan is going to be the one that gets the up to $3,300 contribution. But that was a good question.
Yeah, and along that lines, any of you guys that have questions, just type them into your chat box. We'll pick them up and we'll get those answered as we go along.
Okay, here's another one that I get all the time is what if I never have qualified medical expenses?
That's
Well,
great.
that's extremely highly unlikely since again, and we're all getting old and most of us go to the doctor or have eyeglasses or false teeth or something. It's almost impossible for you not to have a qualified medical expense because the expenses are defined so broadly, but I suppose it's possible. um, if the way it works is if you don't use it for qualified medical expenses, you can still get money from the HSA, but it's kind of like a traditional IRA in that sense. It's taxable, okay? And if you do that before age 65, again, another weird age, then you'll have to pay a 20% additional tax on the distributions. Uh, so when you reach age 65 and you really have absolutely no medical expenses ever until the day you drop dead, if you wanted to take a distribution, it would be, taxable, but no penalty after age 65. Again, this is almost an impossible situation. I have glasses. I need dental work, which I probably never get done because I'm always having more expenses for my kids. My kids have medical expenses, as I've described before. My wife has medical expenses. It's not only you, but it's all your family members, your dependents and your spouse. And all of us get old, and the chances of both spouses being very healthy until the day they drop dead is almost impossibly small chance. So you're all going to have medical expenses eventually. You just got to save those medical receipts up and reimburse them when you're ready for them.
Well, that's good
So where do you
news.
get useful information? What's that?
I said that's good news. We're all going to get sick and need and need help, but at least we'll be able to
Hey,
handle it financially.
You know what? I'm just a realist, Jim. I'm the kind of guy that would, on my deathbed, set up a Roth IRA for one of my relatives so they could have an inherited Roth IRA. I'm just that practical about things.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I would set up as many of them as I could. So, so if you get sick,
But
Quincy, make sure you call me.
I'll call you. You bet, Jim. That you'll be the first person on my mind. Anyway, some useful publications for HSAs, and we're not done with the presentation. We're just started on HSAs. IRS Publication 969 is health savings accounts and other tax-favored health plans, so that's a publication you'll need. 502, I've already mentioned the medical and dental expenses included in the health coverage tax credit, which again happens to be the same expenses that are able to be reimbursed for HSAs. And you can get those publications and more from going to irs.gov to get those. Okay, so now we're going to switch focus for a minute and talk about Coverdell Education Savings Accounts, or ESAs, or sometimes called CESAs, CESAs. And they're used to pay, well, qualified education expenses. Now, these aren't quite as good as the HSAs because they're not deductible going in, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But still, when used to pay for qualified education expenses, the taxes come out tax-free. So eligible expenses include not only college expenses, but expenses for elementary or secondary school. That would be high school and whatnot. So let's see what that looks like. Again, contributions are not tax deductible, but distributions for qualified education expenses are tax-free forever. That's my favorite thing in the world. And the current rules, they were due to expire. These things were created a long time ago, and until the early 2000s, the contribution limit was $500. Wow, that didn't do anybody much good, so they extended it to $2,000 and then made the rules extended. That was a 10-year extension of those rules, and then they extended it again for 2 more years until 2012, and then they made it permanent with the fiscal cliff legislation last year, or I guess it's 2 years now. So
And
anyway,
the
these
best
rules
part
are
of the
now
slide
permanent.
is tax-free forever.
It is. It really is.
It's a big benefit.
Now, this is pretty exciting, Jim, to know what expenses you can include. That just like the HSA, these are pretty broad. So when you're talking about elementary and secondary education expenses, it can include tuition, fees, books, supplies, equipment, academic tutoring, special needs services. It can include, if required by the school or provided by the school, room and board, uniforms, transportation, and extended day programs. That's pretty broad for undergrad or for elementary and secondary. Also, believe it or not, this is my favorite, computer technology, equipment or internet access, if they are to be used by the beneficiary and the beneficiary's family during any of the years the beneficiary is in school. Well,
I mean, that's
Jim, I
pretty
don't know.
awesome.
Isn't that pretty broad? I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
basically, you can pay for your computer technology as long as you got a student in school that uses it for school projects and stuff. Doesn't everybody need? I mean, I know my kids have to have the internet to do stuff and look up stuff all the time. So technically, I can reimburse myself for that technology and equipment or internet access. I think that's pretty cool to do it. Of course, you know me, Jim. I got the Coverdells for the kids, but I'm saving that for that very horrendously expensive, which you're almost done with. I hate you.
College?
College, right? But
Yeah,
these are
my
still pretty
second one is
broad.
finishing up. So your pain is starting and mine is easing.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to get me some good deals out there in Virginia, there,
Well, let's
buddy.
talk about it. Good idea.
Okay. Well, qualified education, higher education expenses. So this is college and higher. Includes tuition, fees, books, supplies, equipment, uh, and at least if you're enrolled half-time or more, room and board, and all kinds of stuff. And even this is probably my favorite part of the college expenses. Everybody likes the 529 plans where you can stick a bunch of money in there, but nobody even thinks about the fact that that's a qualified education expense. So you can actually use the Coverdell to buy a 529 plan to pay for the college tuition for 4 years for your kid. I think that's
Well,
pretty
I'll tell you, I
cool.
wish I'd have known that several years ago because I used a 529. It worked good, but if I could have done it in conjunction with an ESA and funded it with my real estate investments, it would have been even easier.
Exactly. I mean, where was this presentation when you needed it, right?
Well, that's why you're the secret financial agent.
Well, I like to say, you know what I like to say, Jim? You've heard it before from me,
Mhm.
but use the law, don't abuse the law.
Right.
If the law allows you to do it, then use it. Go ahead, do Roth conversions, do HSAs, do Coverdells, but don't abuse it. Use it for its intended purpose, and it's just they have some wonderful tax benefits for you.
So what you could
Okay,
do
so
is you could start an ESA when your kids are young and
absolutely.
and just put a house in it and hold on to it for say 15 years till they're 18 and then sell it and you're probably in pretty good shape because you've had cash
Or
flow for 15 years plus you've got equity, right?
exactly right. And we're
It's
going to talk
almost
about that in a
easy.
minute. So, as I mentioned, the contribution limit is $2,000 a year until the beneficiary, that's the kid, reaches age 18. After that, in order to contribute to an a CISA, the kid has to be disabled. So there is income limits which are almost inconsequential because the contributor has to have less than 110,000 as a single or 220,000 as a joint couple. But the stupid thing is that if you make over the limit, which uh, my wife and I do, all we do is find a family relative or even just a friend that makes under the limit, give them a gift because that's well within the gift limits, and they turn around and write the check to the HSA. So the income limits are there, and you got to pay attention to them, but they're just uh, completely useless. So, for example, I said last year, I said to my brother Nathan, I said, "Hey Nathan, you love your nieces? Yeah. You believe in education? Yeah. Here's $4,000. You might want to consider donating to their Coverdell Education Savings Account." So he did, although he did misspell my daughter's name on the check, but hey, I forgave him. You know what I mean? So another thing about the Coverdell is that if the kid does not end up using the money, which again they're pretty broadly for expenses for college and elementary, but if they happen to not use them, then it can be switched to another family member for them to use, and that family member includes the kids of the original beneficiary. So most people, or a lot of people, have children by age 30. They can switch it to their own kids. Or in my case, I have two daughters. What if one of them gets a full ride scholarship? A little fantasy there, wasn't it, Jim? But if she gets a full ride scholarship or something and doesn't use it for that or for graduate
Yeah.
school, which I'm sure she'll also go to, then I can switch it to her younger sister and let her sister go to school on it. And it goes all the way out to cousins, so you can
Oh,
switch
that's
it to
awesome.
various family members.
It's the gift
So
that
it's
keeps on
very, very
giving.
cool. So, Jim, you talked about, well, what can you do in these accounts? Well, of course, you can buy real estate, including debt finance real estate, like we talked about just a few minutes ago. You can buy real estate secured notes. You know, I'm buying a note right now. I think I talked about it while I was in Virginia there. I'm buying a note now that's going to yield me, I think, 14.8% over 72 months, and the loan to value on the property is like 12%. I think that's a pretty safe note.
I think there's people on the call today that would take that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I well, I'm hoping it comes through. Of course, you know, the deals come and fall apart all the time, but
They do.
I think that one's actually such a good deal that it's going into my HSA account. because I like the cash flow going into my HSA, and
Great
72
idea.
months is a pretty quick payback. Also, notes secured by something else other than real estate or unsecured notes. Again, if you're not a very bright investor and you want to do it unsecured, there's nothing that prevents you. Options, you talked about this. Oil and gas interests, limited liability companies, limited partnerships, private stock. I happen to own a whole bunch of Icon Bank stock in my accounts, including my Roth IRA, and a whole lot of other interesting things that I think most of the listeners on the line know, that self-directed IRAs and HSAs and Coverdells are very flexible as to what types of investments you can do in them. So I wanted to share, to kind of wrap this up, I wanted to share a few case studies, and most of these are from my own account. In this first example, it was just a private loan, which I made to one of my borrowers, and he was paying the appraisal of the property was $45,000, and he was paying $35,000 for the property and putting $10,000 down, and wanted to borrow $25,000 from my account, which I combined together my Roth IRA and my wife's Roth IRA and my HSA and my mom's traditional IRA and a friend of mine's traditional IRA to make this $25,000 loan. So the interest rate was originally 10% for the first 6.5 years or so, and then, five or 5.5 years, I charged him 12%. Then I kind of gave him a break because he'd been paying 12% all those years, so I knocked it down to 10%. That's very nice of me, I know.
You're a nice loan shark.
I really am. I did only charge 6 points up front, so, and of course I took a first lien position on the real estate. So that's just a very simple kind of semi-hard money loan. Soft hard money is what I call it, out of my account, including my HSA participated in that. Here's another example. I like this example because it's very creative. I loaned somebody who wanted to start up a Amazon sales business, and I loaned them $6,000 secured by a convertible option, and they wanted me not to take the option to own a part of the business once it got going. So we agreed on a rate of return to 25% in about a 1-year period. And basically I'm giving up what I had, which is an interest-bearing loan with a right or an option to convert to equity in the entity when they formed the entity. That was the deal I made. So I either got 6% interest plus half of the entity once they got it going, or I got a buyout provision where they bought me out for 25% return on the money, or $7,500 due in less than a year. So either way, I won in that case.
How did that turn out?
Well,
it's like being on the Shark Tank.
Off, and yeah, that's a pretty good rate. I agree, but he was going to be very successful, and apparently the business is going well. So I could have been a meanie and just went ahead and converted. But the purpose of this, Jim, in my mind, was to help a young person get started in business. And so I didn't really mind taking a measly 25% profit in less than a year. It was out of the goodness of my heart, you know what I mean? So I'll get paid off by the end of August on that. It's due September 1st. So more to come on that. But I thought it was a pretty creative use of 1 year's contribution limits to an HSA. Here's another deal. This is actually, well, I must have put all my own examples in here, because this is probably one of my favorite properties that we were able to buy for $35,000. That's to purchase and rehab this property. Now, this is southwest of Fort Worth, Texas, and you can laugh all you want, but it's an upper-end mobile home of about 2,000 square foot mobile home, obviously a double wide, on a 1 to 3 acre lot of land. And we were able for a while to buy these things to buy them and fix them up between $35,000 and $40,000, and they rent for $850 to $900 a month.
Good numbers.
Those are good numbers. So basically, I partnered my HSA. At that time, I had about 35,000 in my HSA, and so I partnered with it, sweat equity partner, and basically I put up all the money to buy and rehab the property, 100%. My partner, who had already 35 other rentals in the same subdivision or the same couple of subdivisions southwest of Fort Worth, adding another unit to the portfolio wasn't really that much of a burden to him, but he put up the deal because he found the deal. He always went out and looked at all the HUD deals and the management of the projects throughout. And what did he get out of it? Well, he got half the equity in the property and roughly half, and not roughly, exactly half the net rent. So he got half a property for free, and I got a great deal that I just didn't have to mess with. The rent
That's what I call my classic joint venture. I love that structure because it wins for everybody.
It wins for everybody, exactly. So the rents are split equally, and the net rents, of course, after all expenses. And when the property is sold, I get my money back for my HSA plus 50% of whatever the increase is. A classic scenario and a great deal for my HSA.
Absolutely.
Here's simple, straight partnership. Again, this is nothing tricky. Just another one of these same. No, this was not. I take it back. This was in Michigan, where we combined the Coverdell education savings accounts of my daughters with our Roth IRAs and some people's traditional IRAs. They were not ours. To buy, rehab, and rent a house. We paid $40,000 for more than 2,000 square foot house on a half acre of land in Lansing, Michigan, or maybe it was East Lansing, I don't remember. And again, you may laugh at that, but the place has been rented for over $900 a month for the same person for the last about 4 or 5 years. That's profit.
That's what you call laughing all the way to the bank, Quincy. I mean, those are great numbers.
Exactly right. And these are actually out of my own portfolio, so that's the thing.
Good for you.
So anyway, these are just some of the things. So we got one more example here. Those were all, those are 3 HSA examples and a Coverdell example. Here's the second Coverdell example. I wish this was mine, but it's not. But this person found the house that he could buy for $5,500. Now, the house happened to have been heavily fire damaged. And this guy was the interesting part of the story, though, is the guy was a fireman. He swears he didn't burn down the house to make the deal work. But seriously, though, the part about him being a fireman was that he was able to judge the damage to the house. As a fireman, he had some experience with it. So he put it under contract for $5,500, which was basically the lot value, because the people were being harassed by the homeowners association, and they had taken their money, paid off their mortgage, and run and moved to a different subdivision. So they didn't want the house. All they wanted to be is rid of the hassles. So they agreed to a purchase price of $5,500. The earnest money was $100, and of course, you know, Jim, that had to come out of the CESA account,
Absolutely.
the Coverdell Education Savings Account. And then he found another person who was used to rehabbing houses, including burned down houses, and was able to negotiate a sales price to that person of $14,000. So basically, on the day of sale, 30 days after he entered into the contract with $100 out of his Coverdell, the closing took place. There was an $8,500 assignment fee, and the sellers got rid of the house and their headache, and the Coverdell received a $8,500 assignment fee, which is an 8,400% return in 30 days. I would say that was pretty good, wouldn't you?
I'd say it's a smoking hot deal.
Oh, very good, Jim.
Hey, we've got a question in. It says a partnership between your Roth IRA and your children's ESAs is not a prohibited transaction?
Very, very good question.
It's an awesome question.
Right. And it's a little bit of a complicated answer, but let me try to shorten it for you as much as possible. What There is some guidance from the Department of Labor which indicates that if you're going in side by side at the same time, which is what happened in this case, and that that's not going to necessarily violate the rules for a prohibited transaction. So, for example, if my Roth IRA owned the house or the LLC, and I invited my daughter's Coverdells into it, then that would be a real problem because they're not done simultaneously. But if they are done simultaneously, the ruling from the Department of Labor is that if there's only a quote unquote just a insubstantial benefit from co-investing, that's not going to violate the rules. Now, having said that, the Department of Labor went ahead and also gave a number of warnings, like that the account could not depend upon the disqualified person for participation in the deal. In other words, if there's some kind of benefit or some conflict of interest which arises later, then it could turn into a prohibited transaction. Let me give you a couple of examples. I have an investment in a bank, and the investment in that bank was $25,000 minimum. I invested individually $25,000 or more, and I invested through my retirement plan $25,000 or more. Well, we're both co-investors in that bank, and we did it at the same time, but there was no advantage to one over the other. You see why? Because we were just both minor investors in this particular transaction, and nobody gained an advantage. I didn't gain an advantage personally, nor did the IRA gain an advantage from my participation. On the other hand, if I'd had a situation where I only had $12,500 and my IRA only had $12,500, and I had to depend on each of us had to depend on each other to make that investment. Now there's been a benefit for doing that transaction, and that could be considered prohibited. Now, another example, suppose I invest $90,000 from my traditional IRA and $10,000 from my Roth IRA, and that's fine, and everything's fine, and it closes, and it's side by side, so nothing more than an inconsequential benefit from that. That should be okay, right? But later on, the house needs a roof repair, and my Roth IRA doesn't have any money, and my traditional IRA does. Can the traditional IRA just go ahead and fund the repair? The answer is no, because that would be a prohibited transaction. So I guess what I'm saying, Jim, is a great question, and it's if you're co-investing disqualified persons with your IRA, and a disqualified person can include the IRA of another disqualified person, right? Then you're running in the gray area. So let's be perfectly honest about that. So my way of looking at things of co-investing is I don't mind being in that gray area as long as I go in side by side at the same time with retirement accounts or CESAs or HSAs. I will never, ever do a side-by-side investment between me personally and my HSA or my Roth IRA, because I just think that even though the legal analysis is the same, I'm not comfortable with that level of risk, because it would look a lot funkier to the IRS to say, oh, Quincy, look what you did. You partnered with your IRA, as opposed to saying, oh, Quincy, well, what you did is you partner your wife's Roth IRA with your Roth IRA. They're both Roth IRAs, or with your daughter's Coverdell accounts. It just doesn't seem as egregious, doesn't feel as egregious to have two accounts put together. But that doesn't mean it's not in the gray area, and that's probably as short as I can make it. I do have a class, as you know, Jim, on prohibited transactions, and we discuss partnering with your IRA, and we discuss the Adler advisory opinion letter, which is what that one is. Fascinating area and a great question. But I'm comfortable with the risk, though it's in the gray area in
It's a
that
great
case. But
question.
it's a
Thanks
good,
for
good
asking it.
question. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, well, that was always my final thought when we were in Richmond, right? Open a self-directed
Yes.
IRA
How
or
do they do
HSA
that? What's the easiest,
or
best way?
CISA. Well, there's my contact information, and if you just go to www.questira.com or email me at quincy@questira.com. And if you have questions, by the way, this is one service that I offer, is if you ask a question on www.askquincy.com, those actually come to my personal email address, and I answer 95% of them myself. So if you got a question like the one that was just asked, which is a great question again, and then go ahead and email it. Go to askquincy.com or IRAwebadvisor.com, goes to the same place. And just ask the question. I'm happy to answer it.
So Quincy,
And
maybe you,
after
since you're doing screen share, why don't you just pull up Quest IRA website real quick and show them what it looks like or where to go on there? Would you mind doing that?
Okay.
That's kind of
Sure,
the
no
power of the
problem.
webinar.
No problem. So let me pull up. Let's just go to, first of all, to questira.com.
So if they wanted to open a new account, go to questira.com right here.
Yeah, you can contact an IRA specialist if you have a request there, but you can see that open an account. You can kind of see how that works. You can go to health savings account, for example, and
Get the
the
kit.
kit. You see where it says there, get the kit. Also, all of our free education is here. I suspect this webinar archive will be on the webinar archives. Our events are always listed. So there's a lot of great information there. Then we can go to Quincy, and that's my blog, which again is IRAwebadvisor.com. Same thing as Ask Quincy, but this is if you have a question. That's my nerdy self looking in my office there. You can type the question in. You can also go to the home page of that, and you can see the latest articles and or the answers to emails. So there's an article I wrote, and here's somebody that emailed me a great question about, using the same trustee to various entities, and I just answered the question. So, those, I sanitize those so you can't tell who it was, but that's a lot of interesting reading on that. You can just kind of see how that goes. I either write articles or answer email questions. So some good information there.
All right. Well, thank you. Everybody go back over to questira.com and follow up with your questions there, or email them to Quincy, or just give him a call. It's fine. It's no problem. He's a great guy, and he's happy to do that. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for the questions. And there will be a replay link, so you can look for that. But it's nice to hang out with you guys this afternoon and talk about some advanced concepts for investing in real estate, protecting your health future, and savings for your kids' college education. Put it to work and go make some deals and make some money. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.